In the elevator hall filled with the scent of disinfectant, Helen Mitchell checked her wristwatch with tired eyes. 5 minutes remained until visiting hours. She smoothed her shoulder-length brown hair and adjusted her suit collar. "Let's do our best today," she whispered to herself, her words dissolving faintly into the silent space. The pediatric ward of Minneapolis General Hospital was wrapped in a peaceful quiet before visiting hours. At the end of the hallway, a nurse was quietly reviewing patient charts. At 37, Helen worked as a senior editor in the proofreading department of a publishing house. Her days were filled with the meticulous work of editing and proofreading textbooks and children's books. The revision of the science textbook series was this year's biggest project. Since her daughter Amy was hospitalized 2 weeks ago, she had switched to shorter working hours with her supervisor's understanding. Still, the deadlines kept pressing. At the publishing house office downtown, she concentrated on work from morning until early afternoon. A coffee cup was a constant presence on her desk, and her red pen never rested as she made detailed corrections. Her colleagues trusted her methodical work style. Leaving home at 7 a.m., she immersed herself in work throughout the morning. She left the office at 1 p.m. for the 2 p.m. visiting hours, and continued working from home in the evenings. This was her current routine. It was a blessing in disguise that her years of proven performance had earned her the privilege of working from home. Helen's husband, Richard Mitchell, was a cardiac surgeon who held an important position at this hospital. Tall and well-groomed, he always wore either a pristine white coat or a suit. His gentle and intellectual nature had earned him high regard both as a doctor and as a husband. His precise judgment and reliable technique in the operating room had saved many patients' lives. They lived in a single-family home in Edina, a quiet residential area of Minneapolis. Located in a long-established prestigious district, their spacious garden bloomed with seasonal flowers. As an affluent middle-class family, they had lived comfortably without want. On weekends, they would spend peaceful times taking family walks around Lake Harriet or enjoying shopping at the Mall of America. That daily life changed completely with Amy's sudden hospitalization. Their 10-year-old daughter Amy was a 5th grader at Willow Creek Elementary School. She was a petite girl with long black hair and large brown eyes. Usually energetic and cheerful, she had served as a library committee member, helping organize the school library as part of her daily routine. Now, however, she had spent 2 weeks in a hospital bed with unexplained fever and weakness. Despite numerous tests, doctors were puzzled, unable to identify the cause. Helen stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 6th floor. As it ascended, she let out a deep sigh. She briefly lowered her eyes at her tired reflection in the mirror. "I wonder how Amy is today," Helen quietly murmured to herself, imagining her daughter in her light blue long-sleeved pajamas. The anxious look in her daughter's eyes squeezed at her mother's heart. The daily visiting hours were precious time to check on her daughter's condition, but they were also moments when she felt powerless as a mother. The elevator continued its slow ascent to the 6th floor. Only a few minutes remained until she could see the most important person in her world. Yet even that short time felt like an eternity to Helen today. When she opened the door to room 612, soft afternoon sunlight was streaming through the window. Amy's bed was by the window in the two-bedroom. The pristine white hospital room was accented by pastel blue curtains that added a gentle touch of color. The walls were decorated with messages from school, filled with colorful pen writing saying, "Get well soon," and "We're waiting for you in the library." On the bedside table, there was a cherished letter of encouragement from her teacher, Mrs. Brown. "Amy." At Helen's voice, the girl looked up from her book. Those large brown eyes, too big for her small frame, still held traces of anxiety. Her long hair was braided, done by the nurse that morning. "Mom, you came." A faint smile appeared on her daughter's face as she sat next to her faithful guardian, an old teddy bear she'd had since she was little. The medical equipment display quietly blinked, marking the rhythm of regular heartbeats. "How are you feeling today? Has your fever gone down?" "Yes, it's lower than yesterday." "That's good. How about your studies? Did the teacher bring you homework?" "Math and English. But they're not hard. Jessica brought copies of the textbooks after school too." Amy's voice tried to sound cheerful, but lacked energy. Helen gently placed her hand on her daughter's forehead, stroking it as if checking her temperature. "Should we work on the homework together?" "Yes, but before that." Amy picked up the book from her pillow. It was the children's book she had been reading. A cat-shaped bookmark marked the middle of the story. Each daily visit began with these peaceful moments. A small ritual between mother and daughter. However, beneath this calm atmosphere, an unspoken tension lingered. The hospital room routine was strictly scheduled. The day began with temperature checks and blood draws at 6 a.m., breakfast at 7. Various tests and examinations filled the morning. Lunch was at noon, visiting hours started at 2 p.m. Dinner was served at 6 p.m., and lights out was at 9 p.m. "Your grandpa and grandma are coming to visit this weekend. They're driving up from Chicago." When Helen mentioned this, Amy's eyes lit up slightly. Grandparent visits were one of the few pleasures of hospital life. But her expression quickly clouded over. "Will Dad come?" At those words, Helen felt a moment of hesitation. Although Richard worked at the same hospital, he surprisingly rarely visited his daughter's room. How many times had she heard the excuse, "I'm busy with surgery"? "Well, Dad might be busy, but I'm sure he'll make time." As she answered, Helen felt a slight unease. Something in her daughter's voice, fear, anxiety. But before she could examine that feeling more deeply, the sound of a wheelchair came from the hallway. It was time for regular tests. A nurse in a white coat entered the room with a cheerful expression. "Amy, it's time for your CT scan." Amy nodded silently as she was transferred from the bed to the wheelchair. Her hands clutched the teddy bear tightly, her fragile strength evident in her grip. "It's all right, it'll be over soon." Amy gave a small smile at Helen's words. However, in the depths of her eyes, there seemed to be a secret that she couldn't tell anyone. As the nurse wheeled her out, silence returned to the room. Outside the window, spring's gentle breeze rustled the young leaves. Helen watched until her daughter's small back disappeared from view. Helen sat on her daughter's bed amid the quiet sounds of medical equipment. The pillows still held the sweet scent of Amy's hair. 2 weeks since admission. Despite multiple tests, they still couldn't identify a clear cause. "What's happening?" Her whispered words were absorbed into the white ceiling. On Amy's desk lay an unfinished math worksheet. Fraction problems were carefully solved in pencil. Next to it was the hospital menu. Tonight's dinner would be chicken soup, salad, and whole wheat bread. "Your daughter is being very brave." Suddenly, a voice came from behind. Turning around, Helen saw a nurse standing there. With a warm smile, she was checking Amy's charts. Even though the daily blood draws must hurt, she never cries. But she let her words trail off. There was something in her expression that suggested she had stopped herself from saying more. Helen caught that moment of hesitation. But did something happen? "No, it's just that sometimes at night, she seems to have nightmares. She gets restless in her sleep." Those words tightened Helen's chest. What was her daughter fighting alone? When Amy returned from her tests, she looked more tired than usual. After transferring from the wheelchair to her bed with practiced movements, she immediately hugged her teddy bear. "Amy, are you okay? Are you tired?" "A little, but I'm fine." Despite her words, Amy's face was pale. Helen placed her hand on her daughter's forehead and felt a slight fever. "Your fever seems to be rising again. You should rest." "Mom, are you leaving?" Amy's voice trembled. An unusual anxiety seeped through her voice. "I'll stay with you a little longer. Would you read more of your book to me?" Amy nodded slightly and opened her book, as if trying to escape reality by immersing herself in the story world. One afternoon, Helen arrived at the hospital a bit earlier than usual. As she started walking toward room 612 where Amy was staying, the door to room 611 slowly opened. An elderly woman emerged, holding an A4 stand. With neatly arranged white hair and a warm smile, it was Carol Thompson. A former elementary school teacher, she was hospitalized for breast cancer treatment. Helen had passed her in the hallway several times before but had never spoken with her. That day, Carol seemed different. Gone was her usual calm expression, replaced by a serious look as if she had made a grave decision as she stared at Helen. Halfway down the hallway, Carol suddenly stopped. The wheels of her A4 stand quieted. When she turned around, her eyes held an intensity Helen had never seen before. "You're the mother of the child in room 612. Carol's voice was even softer than the sound of medical equipment in the hallway. "Yes, I am." When Helen answered, Carol looked around cautiously before grabbing Helen's arm with trembling hands. The tremor in her fingers conveyed something beyond mere age. "You shouldn't see your daughter right now." Carol's voice grew even quieter. Helen had to lean in to hear. "What? Why?" To Helen's visible confusion, Carol continued in an even lower voice. "For your daughter's sake, for your sake." At those words, a chill ran down Helen's spine. The vague anxiety she had been feeling suddenly transformed into concrete fear that enveloped her entire body. "Did something happen? Please tell me." In response to Helen's desperate question, Carol gave her a pained look. Her eyes reflected deep love for children cultivated through 40 years of teaching experience, along with unspeakable anguish. "I can tell, children's suffering." Carol's voice echoed like a whisper from the distant past. The weight of her words sank deep into Helen's heart. Suddenly, Carol's face turned pale. Her hand gripped the four-stand tighter, her knees slightly shaking. Fatigue seemed to surface all at once. "Carol, are you all right?" As Helen reached out to support her, Carol's body tilted forward. The four-stand made a light sound as it cast a shadow on the white hallway. "Nurse! Someone!" Helen's voice echoed through the hallway. The sound of running feet broke the silence as she rushed toward the nurse's station. "Someone, please! The patient in room 611. Seconds later, two nurses came running. They quickly assessed Carol's condition and immediately brought a wheelchair. "It's all right. Let's get some rest." The nurse's voice was calm. Their routine handling of the situation only heightened Helen's anxiety. As Carol was being seated in the wheelchair, she summoned her last strength to whisper to Helen. "Be careful, especially at night." Those words disappeared amid the nurse's movements. Carol was taken back to room 611. Helen stood rooted to the spot until she could no longer see her back. Silence returned to the hallway. However, this silence was completely different from before. A heavy atmosphere seemed to envelope the entire ward. Helen's feet wouldn't move toward room 612. Carol's words kept echoing in her head. "For your daughter's sake, for your sake. Especially at night." At that moment, all the subtle signs of something wrong began to take shape in Helen's memory. Amy's nighttime restlessness. The slight tremor in her voice when mentioning her father's name. The nurse's unfinished sentences. Unexplained fever and weakness. And the occasional look of unspeakable fear in her daughter's eyes. Helen's hands were shaking. In her wallet was a photo of Amy smiling. It was taken just 3 weeks ago, on the day of her library committee inauguration. Where had that radiant smile gone? At the nurse's station, nurses bustled about. Everyone was caught up in their daily routines, as if nothing had happened in this hallway. However, Helen's world was about to change dramatically. The door to room 612 before her felt heavier than ever before. Should she see her daughter, or heed Carol's warning? The weight of this decision threatened to crush Helen's heart. Carol regained consciousness that evening. Soft twilight light filtered through the window of room 611. Helen sat quietly beside her bed. "I have something I must tell you." Carol's voice was steadier than during the afternoon's incident. The short rest seemed to have restored her strength to speak. "But before that, are you strong?" Helen nodded slightly at this question. In the hours since afternoon, she had considered various possibilities and prepared herself mentally. Amy isn't alone at night. At Carol's words, Helen's heart began to race. The white hospital walls seemed to close in around her. After visiting hours, in the middle of the night, Dr. Richard Mitchell regularly visits room 612. In that moment, all the pieces connected in Helen's mind. No. Carol gave Helen a pained look as she choked out those words. I was an elementary school teacher for 40 years. I never missed the small changes in children, the fear in their eyes, the tremor in their voice. Carol stopped fidgeting with her foreline and continued slowly. I didn't notice at first. But the sounds of distress at night, footsteps in the hallway, and above all, the fear hidden in your daughter's eyes. Those eyes were the same as ones I saw many times during my teaching career. Helen's hands were shaking. The family photo in her wallet now felt like a cruel irony. Why didn't Amy tell me? As Helen's words caught in her throat, Carol gently placed her hand over hers. Your daughter was trying to protect you. At those words, tears spilled from Helen's eyes. There were threats from her father. If you tell your mother, I'll put her in the hospital. She'll lose her job. I have connections throughout the hospital. Carol's voice carefully conveyed each heavy fact. Using his position as a doctor, he implied he could falsify medical records, demonstrated his influence in the hospital, and even suggested he could pressure your workplace. Helen clenched her fists tighter, not feeling her nails digging into her palms. But why did Amy? In your daughter's words. Mom is already tired from work. I didn't want to worry her more. I didn't want to see Mom cry. I was scared of breaking up the family. It was a decision made from pure love. The pressure that a 10-year-old girl had been bearing alone. The desperate consideration to protect her mother. The weight of it all squeezed Helen's heart. Her father skillfully maintained control through everyday language, Carol continued. This is an expression of love, it's for your own good, this happens in other families too, this is because you don't listen. With such words, he planted guilt and fostered helplessness. Amy believed she couldn't ask anyone for help. Her father was an important figure at the hospital. A respected cardiac surgeon. His social status had silenced the small girl's voice. Your daughter said, I thought no one would believe me, Dad is a doctor everyone respects, I didn't want my school friends to know. This sense of isolation made it even harder for her to speak up. Helen's muffled sobs echoed in the quiet hospital room. Carol quietly checked the door to ensure the sound wouldn't leak into the hallway. But she's not alone anymore. Helen's voice was filled with strong determination. Standing up, she gazed out the window. The evening sky was beginning to turn deep purple. I'm calling the police. At those words, Carol's expression showed relief. I'll testify too. And Carol pulled out a notebook from her bedside drawer. This is a record of everything I've noticed. Times, places, conversations. I've documented as much detail as possible. The meticulous records kept with a former teacher's thoroughness would serve as crucial evidence. That night, a specialized child abuse investigation team arrived at the pediatric ward of Minneapolis General Hospital. Quickly but quietly, taking utmost care not to disturb other patients' rest. Richard Mitchell was arrested in the middle of the night. The sight of him being handcuffed while still in his white coat in the hospital hallway symbolized the hollowness of his authority. "You have the right to remain silent." The officer's voice echoed in the quiet hallway. As former colleagues watched in disbelief, Richard was led away without uttering a word. The next morning, the hospital established an internal investigation committee. Richard's duties were immediately suspended. Simultaneously, victim protection measures were put in place, and mother and daughter were moved to a secure location. In Amy's new hospital room, Helen held her daughter tightly. "I'm sorry. I didn't notice." "No. I wanted to protect you, Mom." They shared a long silence through their tears. It was a special moment where indescribable pain mixed with hope for a new beginning. By the window where soft spring sunlight streamed in, Amy was tying the ribbon of her new school uniform. 1 year after the incident, mother and daughter had started a new life in a different district of Minneapolis. "Amy, breakfast is ready." Helen's voice rang out from the kitchen. Though their apartment wasn't spacious, it was filled with warmth. The walls were decorated with Amy's drawings and photos from her new school. "Coming," a bright voice responded. It was the pure voice of a young girl, free from the anxiety and fear of before. The table was set with whole wheat toast, scrambled eggs, and fresh fruit. "You have counseling after school today, right?" "Yes. I'm looking forward to talking with Ms. Martha." Therapy was ongoing, but it was no longer painful. It had become valuable time for understanding herself and growing stronger. At her new school, she had resumed her library committee activities. Surrounded by many friends, she was gradually regaining her smile. Helen had changed too. She was promoted at the publishing house to manager of the planning and editing division. Using her experience, she had begun compiling a collection of abuse survivors' memoirs. Furthermore, she had become a leader in a local single mothers support group, helping other mothers in similar situations. Her father's trial ended with an 8-year prison sentence. His medical license was permanently revoked, and he lost his position at the hospital. He abandoned his appeal and began serving his sentence. Mother and daughter chose to completely sever ties with him. Once a month, mother and daughter have lunch with Carol. Having completed her breast cancer treatment, she still watches over the two with the same warm smile. "What's important is to keep moving forward," Carol would say, her words carrying the weight of 40 years of teaching experience and life wisdom. On weekends, mother and daughter participate in child abuse prevention awareness activities. Amy has begun sharing her experiences with other children who have had similar experiences. She is no longer a frightened little girl, but has transformed into a strong and kind-hearted young woman. "When I grow up, I want to be a children's counselor," Amy said one day. Helen was touched by her daughter's determination to turn her painful experience into strength to help others. A new morning was about to begin. Outside the window, Young leaves swayed in the wind, as if blessing the mother and daughter's new life. "Well, shall we go?" At Helen's voice, Amy stood up energetically. Her back as she put on her shoes at the entrance no longer shrank in fear. Her figure was the very embodiment of hope.